The knock came on a Sunday afternoon while we were arguing about whose turn it was to descale the kettle, and my roommate looked through the peephole, went the color of printer paper, grabbed my hand, laced our fingers like we'd done it 1,000 times, and whispered, "Play along, please." Then she opened the door on a man holding champagne and wearing a smile I would spend the next 11 days learning to hate, and said, brightly, "Grant, wow, you should have called first. This is Micah, my boyfriend. I want to walk you through the 4 seconds before that door opened, because they're the whole hinge of this story." Jules Harper does not panic. I'd lived with her for a year and a half, found her through a roommate app of all the ways to meet the person who rearranges your life, and in 18 months I had watched her stay calm through a kitchen fire, a dead car battery on a highway shoulder, and me, at my worst, the month my startup job evaporated. She is the person who gets quieter when things go wrong. So when her hand closed around mine hard enough to matter, and her whisper had a crack in it, my entire nervous system reached a verdict before my brain caught up. Whoever was on the other side of that door, I was already against him. "Micah," Grant Maddox repeated, stepping in without being invited, handing me the champagne like I was staff, scanning our apartment the way you'd scan a spreadsheet. "The boyfriend, huh? Jules didn't mention you." He said it lightly. He said everything lightly, I'd learn. The man conducted entire hostile takeovers in the tone of a brunch invitation. "I was in town for the week. Thought I'd surprise my favorite co-founder. We have some catching up to do. Some housekeeping." He smiled at her, warm as a heat lamp, and I felt her fingers tighten in mine. "Dinner Tuesday?" "All three of us, obviously. I insist on getting to know the boyfriend." He stayed 11 minutes. He complimented our couch, remembered how Jules takes her coffee, told 2 funny stories in which he was generous and everyone else was lucky, and left a business card on the counter. Grant Maddox, founder and CEO, Loomline, face up, adjusted square to the counter's edge, like a flag planted. The door closed behind him. Jules stood with her back against it and her eyes shut, still holding my hand, and I gave it 10 full seconds before I said, "So, 2 questions. Who is he, and how long have we been together?" She laughed, one shaky note, the kind that's mostly exhale, and said, 18 months. Keep the details close to true, it's easier. And he's Grant. He's my ex and my co-founder and the reason I don't do either of those things anymore. She finally opened her eyes, and here's where I need you to lean in, because what she said next is the sentence the next 11 days hung on. "Micah, that man does not do surprises, and he does not do visits. Grant shows up when he needs something signed. The last time he needed something signed, I lost my company, my equity, my career, and 2 years of my life, in that order, in 6 weeks, with a smile exactly like the one he just left on. So whatever's happening Tuesday, it isn't dinner, it's a closing, and I grabbed your hand because I have sat across from him alone before, and I know exactly how that goes. My name is Micah Park. I write software, I keep receipts, and for 11 days last fall I was the fake boyfriend of the most quietly formidable person I've ever met. While we found out what Grant Maddox needed signed, why he needed it by the Friday after next, and why the answer was buried in a grad school notebook in her mother's garage. Stay with me. Because play along started as a favor at a door. By the end, only one of us was playing, and it wasn't me, and it wasn't her, and the man with the champagne was about to learn the difference between owning a company and owning the truth. That night she told me the history over reheated noodles, flat and fast, like ripping off a bandage that had been on for 2 years. 6 years ago, Jules, machine learning grad student, builds a scheduling optimization engine for her thesis, the kind of algorithm that looks boring and is worth a fortune. The math that decides how 10,000 delivery drivers or nurses or technicians get routed through a day. 5 years ago, Grant, charismatic MBA, finds her at a university demo day, dazzles her, and Loomline is born. Her engine, his everything else. They date, because founders in a foxhole do that. 4 years of 80-hour weeks. Her code is the product, his face is the company. And then, 13 months ago, 6 weeks before her final equity cliff, the vesting date that would have made her 30% stake permanent, Grant's tone changed. Suddenly there were performance concerns, documented ones, a PIP, a paper trail, meetings with an HR consultant she'd never met. 6 weeks of manufactured failure later, she was terminated for cause. Cause being the magic word that vaporized her unvested equity, escorted out of the building her own algorithm paid for, with a severance she now understands was priced at exactly go away, and a professional reputation that developed a smell. She interviewed around town afterward. Doors kept closing gently. Funny thing, how gently doors close in an industry where everyone knows everyone, and one CEO makes a lot of calls. I didn't fight it, she said, staring at her noodles. Everyone asks why. Micah, he had documents. A file this thick, my name on every page, signatures on review forms I barely remembered signing during 100-hour weeks. My word against a binder. And I was so tired, and so ashamed. Because for 4 years that company was my whole identity, and the binder said I'd failed at it. So I took the severance, moved across the country, found a roommate on an app, and started over as a senior engineer somewhere nobody says his name. She looked up, and now he's here, smiling, needing something. So tomorrow, before Tuesday's dinner, I need you to help me figure out what a man who already took everything could possibly still want. It took me 40 minutes, because the internet is undefeated. Tech Press, 3 weeks ago, sources familiar with the matter. Halcyon Systems in advanced talks to acquire Loomline. Deal valued near $140 million. Expected to sign a week from Friday. I turned my laptop around. Jules read the headline twice. And I watched 2 years of shame convert into something with a much higher boiling point. And she said, very quietly, $140 million. And 3 weeks into diligence, Grant Maddox gets on a plane to have dinner with the co-founder he papered out of the company. She looked up at me over the laptop, and the fear from the doorway was gone, replaced by the expression I imagine her algorithm would make if it could, everything routing all at once. Micah, acquirers' lawyers check one thing before all others in a software deal. They check who owns the code. Tuesday's dinner was at the kind of restaurant where the menu has no prices and the tables are far apart. Grant's choice, obviously, because distance between tables means no witnesses with ears. He was already seated when we arrived, and he'd ordered for the table, and I want to describe the performance he gave for the first 40 minutes, because it's a masterclass in the genre. Warm stories about the early days that starred Jules as brilliant but fragile, and himself as her patient champion. Casual mentions of mutual friends who still ask about her, each name a tiny reminder of the world he controlled. 2 kind, condescending questions about my career, filed under assessing the boyfriend's threat level. Low. He poured wine like a man releasing doves. And then, over dessert, the folder, leather, slim, slid across the tablecloth with 2 fingers and a rueful smile, and I clocked, in real time, that the entire evening had been engineered backward from this object. The warm stories to reopen the old account, the mutual friends to remind her of his reach, the wine to soften the hinges, and me fed and flattered into furniture, all of it converging on 8 ounces of leather, arriving exactly when the creme brulee did, because Grant Maddox never asks for anything until the room owes him. So, the housekeeping. Deeply boring, I apologize. Lawyers found some gaps in the old files. You remember what a circus the early days were, Jules. We were signing things on pizza boxes. Some of your onboarding paperwork never made it into the record. IP assignment, confirmatory language, completely standard. Every early employee's doing it. Sign by Friday week, and there's call it a gratitude payment, $25,000 for the inconvenience. He said $25,000 the way you'd say, keep the change. I'd have mailed it, but honestly, I wanted an excuse to see you. I've felt bad for a long time about how things ended. This felt like a chance to close that chapter warmly. I watched Jules Harper pick up the folder, read the cover page of a document designed to retroactively hand over the ownership of a 9-figure algorithm for $25,000, and a smile, and I watched her do the strongest thing I have ever seen a person do at a dinner table. She smiled back, warmly, and put it in her bag. I'll have a look, she said. You know me, I read everything twice. Of course, said Grant, toasting her. But something had flickered behind his eyes at I read everything twice. 1 frame of static in the broadcast, and his follow-up came out 1 degree cooler. Don't take too long, though. Deals have windows, and Jules, this is the nice version of this paperwork. He smiled at me next, to show the boyfriend there was nothing to see. More wine, Micah? In the car, she sat silent for 3 blocks, folder on her lap, and then she said, confirmatory IP assignment. Which confirms it, Micah. There's nothing to confirm unless the original was never signed. 5 years ago, week 1, there was an offer letter and an assignment agreement and 100 fires, and I remember signing the offer letter. She turned to me slowly. I don't remember signing the assignment. And if I never signed the assignment, she looked down at the folder like it was ticking, then Loomline doesn't own the engine. The company he's selling for $140 million is a beautiful showroom built around a car that still belongs to me. That's what Friday week is. And that's why the champagne. He's not closing a chapter, he's closing a deal, and I'm the signature between him and the wire transfer. Okay, I said. Then here's the question that decides everything. What happens when a man like that realizes the nice version isn't going to work? We found out Thursday. But first came Wednesday, because Grant Maddox never applies pressure without first checking the joints. And Wednesday, the joint he checked was us. He texted Jules at 8 a.m., in your neighborhood for meetings, grabbing coffee at the place on your corner at 9. Bring Micah. Love watching you two. Love watching you two. A subpoena with a heart on it. We had 35 minutes to become a real couple, and we spent them at our kitchen table doing what Jules called diligence on ourselves. Rapid fire how we met. The truth, roommate app, but the story continues. And then it just happened, month 8, her version, month 6, I said, and she looked at me a half-second too long and said, fine, month 6. First date, the taco place, also true, we'd actually gone, as roommates, which is the thing about our cover story I kept having to not think about. Every fact in it was real, only the label was fake. Coffee orders, families, toothbrush colors. He interrogates like a diligence lawyer, she warned, pulling on her coat. He'll split us up and cross-check. He did it to a CFO candidate at a barbecue once. Whatever he asks, answer small and true. He did exactly that. Ordered for the table again. He does it to establish who provisions the world. Then dispatched Jules to grab napkins and leaned into me, warm as ever. Month 6, huh? She seems settled. Good. Settled is good for her. Beat. You two talk about her old job much. Small and true. She doesn't love the topic. He nodded. Filed it. And the paperwork? She mention it? Just curious if she's stressing. I worry. Small and true. Jules doesn't really stress. She reads things twice. One frame of static again behind the eyes. The second time that phrase had landed somewhere I couldn't see. And then Jules was back with napkins, and he was mid-anecdote without a seam. But here's what Wednesday actually accomplished, and why I'm telling you about a 20-minute coffee. Walking home, Jules was quiet, and then she said, month 6. I said the taco place had felt like a date. Sue me. And Jules Harper, who timestamps everything, said, it was month 5, and the reason I know that is not a conversation we can afford until after Friday week. And kept walking. And I stood on that sidewalk for a second doing exactly the kind of unauthorized hoping that violates every rule of a fake relationship, before jogging to catch up. Hold that, it matters later. Everything with a timestamp matters later. Thursday, the velvet came off in layers, the way it does with men who file their cruelty under project management. First, at 9 a.m., a courier, to her office, her new job at Field Note, maximum visibility, with a letter from Loomline's counsel, a reminder of her separation agreement's non-disparagement clause, a reminder of her non-compete, and a paragraph noting, with exquisite neutrality, that her current employment may fall within the covered field, and that Loomline reserved all rights. Translation, per the employment lawyer we sat across from that afternoon, Dana Whitfield, recommended by a friend of a friend, a woman who read the letter once, snorted, and read it again slower, savoring, sign the folder, or we make your new job legally radioactive during an acquisition when we have infinite lawyer money and you have a salary. Here's what this letter actually is, Dana said, tapping it. It's expensive stationery wrapped around a bluff with a real gun inside. The non-compete's probably unenforceable here. Probably. But probably costs 18 months and 6 figures to prove, and he knows your employer won't wait out probably. This isn't law. It's siege economics. He doesn't need to win. He needs you to be starving by the time you could. She set the letter down. So the question isn't whether he's bluffing. It's whether you have anything that makes the siege more expensive for him than for you. Do you? Jules and I looked at each other. We think so, Jules said. We'll know by Sunday. Then go find out by Sunday, said Dana Whitfield. And if it's what your faces say it might be, I'm cutting my rate, because I get maybe 2 of these a decade. Second, at 4 p.m., her manager called her in, apologetic, cornered, because Field Note's general counsel had received a courtesy copy. Nobody fired her. Everybody was very kind. Her access to the flagship project was paused pending review, which is the corporate phrase for the sound a door makes closing gently. 13 months of rebuilt reputation, paused pending review, in one business day, by one courier, from one man who'd poured her wine on Tuesday. And third, this is the one that told me who we were actually dealing with. At 8 p.m., a text to her personal number, from Grant himself, no lawyers, just the brunch invitation tone rendered in writing. Heard there's some noise at your new shop. Awful timing, hope it resolves. These things usually do, once loose ends get tied. Folder by Friday? Let's keep everything nice. Fondly. G. Fondly. The man weaponized fondly. Jules put the phone down on the kitchen table, and I watched her hands, and they weren't shaking. They were flat and very still, which in Jules is the same thing turned inside out. This is the part, she said quietly, where I signed, last time. Right here. This exact pressure, this exact niceness with the trap door under it. You get so tired, Micah. You start pricing your own surrender. It's just a signature, it's just equity, it's just a company. Take the 25 grand, keep your little job, be grateful. She stopped. And then my roommate, my fake girlfriend of 5 days, looked up at me across the kettle we still hadn't descaled and asked the question that the entire rest of this story answers. Tell me why it's different this time. Because last time it was your word against a binder, I said. So this time, we build a bigger binder. You're a scientist, Jules. He beat you with documentation. Fake documentation. But organized. Fine. I've spent 10 years reading version control histories. Code doesn't gaslight. Git doesn't get tired. Somewhere there is a commit log, a timestamp, a notebook, a thesis file that proves the engine walked into Loomline already yours, and we have 9 days to assemble the provenance of a $140 million algorithm. He brought lawyers to a paperwork fight. I turned my laptop around again, the way I had on night 1. He should not have brought paperwork to an engineer fight. She stared at me. Then she said, Mom's garage, and went to find car keys, and at the door she stopped, came back and, for the record, with no ex watching, no audience, no cover story requiring it, kissed my cheek, 1 second, businesslike as a stamp. That's not playing along, she said, already leaving. That's a down payment on thank you, drive fast. Her mother's garage 4 hours away contained a kayak, every National Geographic since 2004, and 6 banker's boxes labeled J School in her mom's handwriting. We drove down Saturday, and her mom fed me twice, showed me baby photos over Jules's objections. Mother, he is a colleague. Said her mother, a woman who has never once been fooled by anything, ladling me seconds, and at one point cornered me by the refrigerator with the directness Jules clearly comes from. She called me 13 months ago from a parking lot and couldn't finish a sentence. Whatever's in my garage that fixes that, you find it tonight. Then she squeezed my arm and went to bed, and I went to the garage understanding that I'd just been deputized by the one authority in this story that outranked everybody. Jules excavated for 3 hours with archaeological patience. She has a system for everything, including her own past. And at 11 p.m., under a bare bulb, we opened the box that ends careers, the notebooks. 3 of them, grad school era, graph paper, dated entries in Jules's cramped hand, the engine being born, page by page, the core routing insight, the constraint solver, the exact objective function I'd seen described in Loomline's own marketing white paper, here in pencil, dated 14 months before Loomline was incorporated. And better, so much better, every few pages, in green ink, another hand entirely, her thesis advisor's annotations, questions, corrections, one delighted. This is the whole ballgame, Jules. Publish or patent, but date everything. Professor Lindquist, who, we confirmed by email that night, is alive, tenured, remembers the work vividly, still has Jules's thesis drafts with university timestamps on the department server, and, direct quote from a 70-year-old academic typing at midnight, have waited 5 years for someone to ask me about this. That company's founding story has been irritating me since their Series A. What do you need and when? And then, Sunday night, back home, the second vein, her old personal laptop, the one predating Loomline, which she'd kept, because engineers keep laptops like sailors keep knots. On it, the original Git repository. The engine's first 400 commits, authored under her personal email, time-stamped across her final grad school year, every incremental step of the algorithm's construction. And then, in the history, the exact moment of Loomline's birth, the repo forked into the company's infrastructure, her grad school commit history riding along inside it like rings in a tree. I sat there scrolling 5 years of cryptographic timestamps and started laughing. Jules, it's not that you can prove you wrote it before the company existed, it's that their own production codebase proves it. Every copy of Loomline's engine carries your grad school history inside it. He's been selling a car with your name stamped on the engine block, and he's never once looked under the hood, because he can't read. Jules looked at 400 commits with her own name on them, and something 13 months old finally came off her face. And what was under it wasn't rage. It was worse. For Grant, it was certainty. "The binder," she said. "His binder, the PIP, the performance file. If he faked the ending, he faked it in a hurry, in 6 weeks, during a fundraise. Hurried people make timestamp mistakes." She cracked her knuckles, and for the first time since a champagne bottle crossed our threshold, she smiled with her whole face. "Pull the headers, Micah. Let's audit the man's lying." The performance file, she still had her copy, because severance agreements make you keep what they make you sign, was PDFs of emails. And email PDFs, friends, carry their metadata like mud on boots. 2 of the key concern emails, dated months before her firing, had been created, composed, per their headers, 11 days after her termination date. The PIP document's author field belonged to the HR consultant. The consultant's firm's invoice, attached to one email in a sloppy forward, was dated before the first concern was ever raised. The paper trail that took her equity had been manufactured backward from the verdict, and it had left its assembly instructions inside itself, because Grant Maddox hired people who bill fast, not people who check headers. 9 days out, we had provenance, a professor, 400 commits, and a forgery audit. What we didn't have was Grant's voice saying the quiet part, so we got it. And getting it is my favorite part of this whole story, because Jules used the one tool the man had given us himself, his absolute, unshakable certainty that she was weak. She texted him Monday. "Read everything twice, like I said. Have questions? Just us? Coffee Wednesday. No lawyers, no boyfriend. He worries. And I want you to appreciate the craft in those 19 words. It offered him exactly the scene his whole model of her predicted. Jules alone, wobbling, pre-surrender, asking permission for her own questions. He replied in 4 minutes, "There she is. Wednesday, 10 a.m. The alcove. Just us. Everything's going to be so much easier now. Gee. The alcove. 10 a.m. One-party consent state. We checked twice. With Dana, who by now had cut her rate exactly as promised, and requested only, quote, a transcript for my wall. We rehearsed Tuesday night at the kitchen table. Jules would ask, never assert. Assertions make careful men careful. Questions make confident men expansive. And she would let silences run, because Grant Maddox has never met a silence he didn't autograph. She practiced her wobble on me twice, and it was so convincing I got genuinely upset both times, which she declared a successful test of the instrument. One rule was mine and non-negotiable. A live feed, me across the street, and a code word if anything felt wrong. She picked kettle, because it's the only fight we've never finished. Jules wore the wire the way she does everything, like it was a normal Tuesday, plus USB-C. I sat in a coffee shop across the street with headphones, a decaf I never touched, and my pulse in my ears. And Grant Maddox, alone with the co-founder he was certain he'd already beaten once, relaxed into his true register inside 6 minutes. She asked, hesitant, well-performed, "What happens if I just don't sign?" And the brunch voice replied, patiently, mask fully off, "Then, Jules, we do the sad version. Diligence flags the assignment gap. I explain, with documentation, you remember my documentation, that a terminated for cause employee is holding the deal hostage over IP she worked on under our roof. Halcyon's lawyers have seen 100 shakedowns. You'll look like number 101. Your performance file gets exhibit numbers. And your new job? Gone by the non-compete alone, sweetheart. Win or lose, you'll be unemployable for the 2 years the lawsuit takes, and I'll spend more on lunches than you'll spend on lawyers." A sip of coffee, audible on the recording. It worked before, you know. It'll work again. Because it's paper, and paper beats memory. So be smart. Sign the nice version, take the 25, and tell the boyfriend. The smile was audible. The grown-ups finished their business. Jules let 1 full second of silence sit on the recording. For punctuation, she told me later, and then said in her own voice, the flat, calm one, the getting quieter when it matters one, Grant. Thank you, that was so much clearer than the folder, and she stood, and left him mid-blink, and crossed the street, and walked into my coffee shop, and took the seat across from me, and set her phone on the table between us, and said, Kettle. Wednesday afternoon, our lawyer sent Halcyon Systems' general counsel, a woman named Priya Raman, whose reputation, per every source, was thorough and humorless in exactly the right way. A 2-line letter. We represent Jules Harper, author of the core Loomline optimization engine. Prior to your Friday signing, you will want 1 hour. The reply came in 90 minutes. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Bring everything. The conference room at Halcyon's law firm had a view of the whole city and a table longer than our apartment, and Priya Raman sat at the head of it with 2 associates, a court reporter's stenotype she'd ordered out of an abundance of optimism, and the stillness of a woman who has ended larger men than Grant Maddox before lunch. Jules presented for 50 minutes. I ran the screens, and I will give you the arc of Priya Raman's face as the exhibits landed, because it was the best television I have ever attended in person. The grad school notebooks, with Lindquist's green ink, date everything, and his sworn declaration, and the university server timestamps, polite attention. The Git history, 400 pre-incorporation commits under Jules's personal email, and then the kill shot, the forensic image of Loomline's own current production repository with her grad school history embedded in its bones. Leaning forward, one associate dispatched from the room at a walk that wanted to be a run. The unsigned assignment gap in their own diligence file. A note, underlined twice. The backdated PIP emails with their treacherous headers. The invoice that predated its own justification. Priya Raman removed her glasses, which I understand from the associates' faces to be a seismic event. And then the recording. All 9 minutes. Paper beats memory. It worked before. It'll work again. Silence. Priya Raman put her glasses back on, looked down the table at Jules, and said the 4 sentences that ended the war. Ms. Harper, Halcyon is not in the business of purchasing lawsuits, stolen engines, or founders who confess to evidence manufacturing on tape. We are, however, very much in the business of purchasing this algorithm, from whoever actually owns it. As of this morning, my read is that's you. Let's discuss what Friday looks like now. There was one more moment in that room I have to give you, because it's the moment I understood we'd actually won. Not legally, cosmically. Deep in the discussion, an associate asked Jules to walk through the objective function at the heart of the engine, diligence style, and Jules stood at the whiteboard and taught it. No notes, no slides, chalk talk from memory, 5 years of the thing living in her hands. And at some point I looked over, and Priya Raman had stopped taking notes entirely and was just watching, the way you watch someone do the thing they were built for. When Jules finished, Priya said, dry as legal paper, for the record, in 11 years of technology diligence, I have never once seen Mr. Maddox answer a technical question without a phone-a-friend. She made a small note. I'd give a lot to know what it said. And Professor Lindquist, patched in by video from his cluttered office for his declaration, contributed the summation the whole 11 days deserved. Counsel, I have annotated 40 years of graduate notebooks. I know original work the way you know a forged signature. Page 61. Green ink, the whole ballgame, was the day that algorithm was born, and I was in the room, and the birth certificate has been in a garage this entire time. Now if we're done, I have office hours. He hung up on the world's most expensive law firm to go help undergraduates, and Priya Raman almost smiled. What Friday looked like now, the signing happened, rewritten. Halcyon acquired Loomline at a revised number, contingent on a simultaneous IP purchase and settlement with Jules that our lawyer described, faintly, as generational. Her stolen equities value restored with what Priya called an integrity premium, her legal releases mutual, her non-compete, and the field note threats withdrawn in writing by end of day. Field Note's GC got his retraction letter before lunch, and her project access was unpaused with an apology meeting she attended purely, she admitted, for the pastries. And Grant, informed by Halcyon's counsel, in a room with his own board, that the deal proceeded only with his founder shares diluted by the settlement, his indemnification for the diligence misrepresentations personal, and his employment with the go-forward entity declined. His board, 3 people who'd heard the tape, did not fight for him. Paper, it turns out, beats memory, and recordings beat paper. He caught us at the elevator, afterward, because his species always needs the last word, and for once the brunch voice couldn't find its pitch. What came out was almost human. You were never this sharp when we were together. And Jules Harper, holding the elevator door with one hand and my hand with the other, said, "I was exactly this sharp, Grant. You just had me filed under fragile." The doors began to close. Check your headers next time. Date everything. Which leaves the part of the ledger you've been waiting for me to reconcile, because I did promise you that by the end, nobody was playing. The house rules of a fake relationship are simple. Hold hands when observed, know each other's coffee orders, we already did, and never ever say anything you'd have to take back when the performance ends. We followed Rule 3 impeccably for exactly 6 days. Day 6 was the garage, the bare bulb, the notebooks, and driving home at 2 a.m. she fell asleep mid-sentence in the passenger seat, and I drove 4 hours listening to her breathe with my heart absolutely wrecked on the floor of that car, and I understood that I had a disclosure problem of my own accumulating interest. So the night after the elevator, everything signed, every threat retracted, the champagne he'd brought still sitting unopened on our counter, where she'd refused to let either of us touch it for 11 days. Jules took it, examined the label, and said, "He has terrible taste in everything but algorithms," and poured it down the sink and rinsed the bottle for recycling, thorough to the end. Then she turned around, leaned against the counter, and looked at me for a long moment with the routing expression, everything calculating at once. "Exit interview," she said. "The fake relationship concluded successfully at approximately 4 p.m. yesterday. Standard practice is feedback. So honest answers only. A breath, the only one she needed." "Micah, when did you stop playing along?" "Day 2, I said. "The noodles. You said you found a roommate on an app and started over. And I spent the rest of the night furious at everyone who'd ever made you start over." "You?" Jules Harper looked at the ceiling, doing the timestamp retrieval she does, precise to the end, and said, "The doorway." Second 3 of 4, your hand closed back. Then she held up one finger. "Amendment pending," which requires me to disclose a correction to the record, per my own policies. On the sidewalk last week, I told you the taco place was month 5, and that the reason I knew was a conversation we couldn't afford until after Friday. It's after Friday. She took a breath, the only one she needed. It was month 5, Micah, and I know because I wrote it down that night. In a notebook, dated. Went to the taco place with M, not a date. Note. Investigate why I needed to write that it was not a date. She looked at me, entirely unarmed for the first time in 11 days. "I never investigated. Some findings you leave in the garage because you can't afford what they prove, and then you grabbed my hand back in a doorway, and I've been over budget ever since." She crossed the kitchen. "So, exit interview, final question, and then we file this whole thing closed." I grabbed the nearest hand, and it turned out to be the right one, which is statistically ridiculous, and I've been trying to reproduce the result ever since under controlled conditions, so... And she took both my hands, deliberately this time, no X, no audience, no cover, and delivered the last line of the operation in a whisper, on purpose, because Jules Harper dates everything and mirrors her own commits. "Play along, please." I've been playing along ever since. We descaled the kettle, eventually. It was her turn. She disputes this. She is wrong, and I have the chore charts version history to prove it. And she says using forensic timestamping to win chore disputes is a misuse of our origin story. And she laughs when she says it. Every time. The real laugh. And that, friends, is the whole return on 11 days of playing pretend. A hand that closed back and stayed. So now it's your turn in the comments. And I want the real versions. Because this story only pays out if somebody down there cashes it. If someone you secretly loved grabbed your hand and whispered "play along," how long do you honestly think you could pretend it was pretend? And what's the moment that would break you? And here's the one that matters. Have you ever watched someone get quietly erased, their work claimed, their story rewritten, their name filed under fragile, and known the truth, and said nothing? Tell me who they were and what the truth was. Name no companies. Name the moment. Somebody in this comment section is one witness away from getting their story back, and your comment might be the header data. If this one held you, subscribe and hit the bell, because next week, I'm telling you about the wedding invitation that arrived at our apartment addressed to Jules plus the boyfriend from a name that made her drop her coffee. Grant's mother. She wants to talk. She's kept files of her own. Hold the hand that closes back. Date everything. And never sign the nice version.